Now for my first guest, who today questioned the Chief Police Commissioner on why BLM protesters were afforded special treatment while lockdown protesters got the zero tolerance approach. Liberal Democrats MP David Limbrick, thank you so much for coming in here. Now, let's start off with the fact that you attended the BLM protest. Why?
Well, it's part of my role as an MP, I think, to watch the government's response to the pandemic. I've had some serious human rights concerns about the way that the government's been dealing with things, so I want to go along and see what's happening on the ground myself.
And you went to the lockdown protest as well. And we had the police commissioner say that they were worried the protesters were going to destroy the joint, so he reluctantly approved the protest for Black Lives Matter. But what sort of a message does that send to the community, that if you become violent, then the police will ease restrictions and allow you to do what you like? Yeah,
I mean, it was a pretty surprising response. I mean, what I would have preferred to see was that, you know, they said that the protest went ahead on that day and that it was managed okay, and all protests should be managed okay. I think the right to peaceful assembly is a really important right that the police should be helping to facilitate, and they've had very different responses to the different groups of people throughout the pandemic.
Absolutely, and I think it goes to this view, you might say it's not the reality, but there's certainly a view out there that the police have been politicised, that they're taking sides in these arguments. And when it comes to BLM, we heard there from the Assistant Commissioner about how much they relate to the protest and can sympathise, and that these people have the right to be there. And then when he was talking about the anti-lockdown, he called them batshit crazy and conspiracy theorists. And, you know, there were people there whose businesses were going bust. There were people there who had no idea about the kooks with the 5G ideas. They were just people who were saying this lockdown is not an effective way to deal with this pandemic. So it was a very different approach, and the police, do you believe, have become politicised?
Oh, look, it's hard to tell, but I mean, the way that they were treated so differently, ironically, both of the protests had a common theme in that they were concerned with police overreach. Yeah. So I think it's quite remarkable, really, that they were treated so differently.
Well, yeah, the Black Lives Matter protests, as you look at them, they are anti-police. They want to defund the police. It's on their website. It is very much part of their platform. And yet they got the kid glove treatment. So it was a very different approach. Now, we've seen in Victoria just record numbers of fines, more than anywhere else in the country. In fact, I think last time I checked, more than the rest of the country combined. These fines are massive, crippling. Massive. Is there anything being done to do something about that? Because we've even had teenagers fined for being 5 kilometres outside more than 5 kilometres outside their radius of their house. And I just can't see how this is justifiable. What's your advice to people who've copped these fines and believe they're not fair?
So you can ask to get it reviewed. We found this in the inquiry today. We were talking about that with the police minister. And if someone's had a fine, they can ask for it to get reviewed with the police if they believe it's unfair. The police said very clearly today that they only want to find people that have been, you know, making deliberate and blatant breaches of the health orders, and people who, you know, might have made a mistake or whatever. They said that they will show discretion was the words that they used. So I'd recommend that people try and ask for their fine to be reviewed.
Now, we're still one of the strictest lockdowns anywhere in the world in Victoria, including curfews and 5 kilometre limits you can travel. The lockdown went longer than it did in Wuhan. Do you think it was the right approach? Do you think if we have another outbreak, that lockdown is the way to get us to the current situation of no community transmission?
Look, absolutely not. I think that the lockdown, of course, worked, but the question really is it the method that is the least restrictive of human rights to control the pandemic? And this is something that I've been following up a lot at this inquiry. I believe that there's many actions that the government's taken that are not the least restrictive of human rights and are not proportionate responses. And so this is what we've been asking, to try and get them to give out the data that underlies their directions and the human rights assessments, which are still secret. And I've been asking over and over in inquiries and in Parliament about this. They still haven't released it. I want an independent ideally, I'd like an audit, like a human rights audit. So yesterday I called for a human rights audit of what are all the directions and what are the human rights that have been impacted by those, so that anyone, including people like me, can assess it, make an assessment. That's why I've been going to the protest, because the only way that I can assess the impact on human rights is to get out on the streets and look at myself at the results. And, I'm not convinced that they really are the least restrictive.
Well, no, you were in there and you saw the police.
I got arrested.
You got arrested and you copped a fine personally.
Well, they said they were going to send me a fine, but I haven't received it in the mail yet, so I don't know what's going on there.
So you could be looking forward to a $1,600
could
invoice.
They said
Christmas.
I'd receive one, but I don't know, maybe their systems are a bit slow or something.
David Limbrick, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.